Hello, welcome to the latest Met Office 10-day trend. And over the next 10 days or so, we're going to see a return to the wet and windy weather across the UK. But first of all, let's take a look at the pressure pattern that we are seeing at the moment across the UK. And there's not too much to say about it. And in fact, the weather recently has been fairly stagnant. We've been in a blocked pattern. So pressure systems haven't really moved very quickly. And that's why we've had some quite persistent dry weather at times and cold weather too. But that is set to change throughout tonight as a result of a strengthening jet stream. You can see it's just beginning to poke its face out here behind me, but if I just move across the Atlantic, you can see there's a very strong jet that's clearly marked on the Atlantic that will start to affect the weather across the UK through tonight, and it's going to stick with us throughout the next week or so. So let's have a look at what happens. As the jet stream pushes towards the UK, it drives these areas of low pressure. You can see there's a sequence of low pressures that we're expecting to see all the way through into Monday, one through the weekend, as well as into Monday and Tuesday. But first of all, let's take a look at the low pressure that's with us at the moment. That's going to bring us an unsettled night and some pretty wet weather on Thursday. It's introducing this much milder air from the southwest, so that's going to pick up temperatures. So last night was likely the last cold night and frosty night for many areas of the UK as we see this change to milder weather for now. But that means that we've got some pretty wet weather coming through on Thursday. There are rain warnings in force for many western areas of the UK, Northern Ireland and eastern areas of Scotland as well. So it's going to be a potentially disruptive day. There's also going to be some very strong winds with this rain too. And over the next rest of the week, we'll see the rainfall totals starting to build up as these series of low pressures come in from the west and rainfall keeps building up across western areas where it's already fairly sensitive. And that mixed up with any snow melt as well across parts of Cumbria, for example, could bring a risk of flooding. But then on Friday, we have the next series of low pressures coming through. So you can see we've got this low pressure out to the north of Ireland on Friday that will sweep across the country, bringing quite a windy and unsettled day. The rain's not as widespread through Friday, but many northern areas could see some pretty heavy outbreaks of rain, and that could bring the potential for some further warnings. And then once that low pressure clears out the way, we get a little bump in the isobar, so potentially a dry spell overnight, but it won't last too long as by Saturday morning, we'll see the next low pressure bringing the next band of rain throughout Saturday. It's got the potential to be quite heavy and again, very windy. It's likely at this stage to move through the morning, leaving a drier interlude behind it on Saturday afternoon, but the timings of that could change a little over the next few days. And then behind that, as I said, we get a drier interlude as pressure starts to build for a time for the start of Sunday. But you can see developing behind me here is the next low pressure. And this low pressure has some uncertainty with it. So what we're looking at now is the latest Met Office global model. And you can see it develops this area of low pressure and it will then push it up towards Northern Ireland and towards Scotland. But there are differences between models and between model runs at the moment. So there is some uncertainty with exactly the details for the forecast on Sunday. So we'll have a look at a little bit more details on that by taking a look at the ECMWF model. So that's the European model. And what I'm showing you here is a result of an ensemble forecast. That's when we run the same model multiple times, starting with slightly different initial conditions, and we see how those differences in the initial conditions change the output. And as we get further ahead in time, that's quite useful to give us a level of confidence in the forecast. So as I said, confidence is a little lower for Sunday in the details, so it is worth keeping up to date with the details on that one. So this one is member 21, so it's one of the ensemble members from the European model. This shows the position of the low pressure on Sunday at midday. You can just about see this is the UK here. So we're a little bit more zoomed out than we were in the previous chart, but you can see we've still got this area of low pressure developing to the west of Northern Ireland. And that develops quite a deep area of low pressure. There's likely to be some strong winds around this, but it is slightly offshore, so the strongest winds will stay away from any land. However, let's take a look at another ensemble output. You can see this ensemble output still has another very deep low pressure, But this time it's much closer to the UK, and in this scenario we'd see strong winds across Northern Ireland and Scotland throughout Sunday, and that would be potentially quite disruptive. So it's important to note that we do have the potential for this scenario. But that's not those two aren't the only scenarios, as some members, for example this one from the European model, member 25, doesn't actually develop a low pressure at all. Instead, it just develops what we call a trough. You can see there is still a low pressure out to the west. All of the models seem to be developing this one, but instead of developing the deep low pressure, we just get a little kink in the isobars. It's like that would likely bring quite heavy rain still, but the winds would not be as much of a problem. So there is some uncertainty in the details for Sunday, potentially some strong winds for Northern Ireland and Scotland. So it's worth keeping up to with the details on that through the rest of the week. We'll be providing updates in our weekend forecast tomorrow. But what happens after that? So you can see with all of these low pressures throughout the week, we've got low pressure after low pressure coming in from the west. Those will all be bringing quite a lot of rain with them, and that is bringing the potential for some further rain warnings through the rest of the week. What we have here are the rainfall accumulations across the UK between Friday and Sunday, when we get two of those low pressure systems coming through. You can see on the left here we have the Met Office model, in the middle here we have the European model, ECMWF, and on the right we have GFS, the American model. Now there are some differences between the models, that's quite obvious to see, but there's also a general trend of rainfall totals building up across western areas, particularly across northwestern England as well as southwestern Scotland, but also parts of Wales. There's quite a strong signal for some heavy rain to come through the weekend. These are similar areas where we already have rain warnings in force, so we already know that these areas are going to be sensitive to more rainfall. So potentially some flooding and disruption due to the heavy rain over the weekend in these areas. But further east, it does look to be that much drier over the next few days, but still it will be quite windy and staying unsettled with a risk of showers at times. Then that takes us on to Monday, when whatever happens with the low pressure, we are expecting it to then move across to the east of the UK, and behind that we get a ridge developing where the isobars start to kink up, and that diminishes the risk of any rainfall. So it's looking like Monday is going to be one of the drier and more settled days over the next few days for the UK. It does look like there would still be some showers coming in off the northwest, bringing some rainfall to some areas, but many areas would see a dry day with some sunshine, and that could potentially be the drier day over the next 5 days or so. But that won't last too long, as the next area of low pressure bringing this frontal rain will move in for Tuesday, bringing another likely wet day through Tuesday. There is still some uncertainty with the exact timings of any rainfall coming through, as there always is with this time scale, but it does look like we will see more rainfall on Tuesday. But then after Tuesday, we do see a change happen again. So after the unsettled start to the 10-day trend, we'll be finishing on a more settled mark, at least for some of us. So this is the output from multiple models: ECMWF, the European model, GFS, the American model, and the Met Office model. And as we amalgamate all of these models and we see what the pressure tendency is across the UK, you can see as we go down, these are old model runs, but so it's good to compare how models have been behaving and changing over time. And this shows the pressure tendency over the next 2 weeks. So we start off with low pressure, bringing all that rain in from the west. But as we head towards Wednesday or around Wednesday, we start to see more reds coming in. Now, if you look back on old model runs, you can see sometimes we've had the blues stick around for a little while longer for much of next week. But more recently, there's increasing confidence. You see the numbers are going up, that we will see a more settled end to the week for some areas of the UK. So that means that high pressure would dominate. But what the weather will be as a result of that does depend exactly where the high pressure sits. And there's still some uncertainty with that. But the most likely scenario is that we will see high pressure building in from the southwest across the UK. So that would bring a more settled end to the week for southern areas. However, you can see that low pressure and wetter weather off the Atlantic would still dominate across northern areas. So here it would probably remain cloudier and wetter, but turning a little bit drier across the south. That's by Wednesday. And then if we have a look towards Friday, then it's more likely we could see high pressure pushing further east, becoming slightly more dominant for more areas of the UK. Now, this is the most likely scenario, but it is not the only scenario. We could see that low pressure lasting a little bit longer into next week, but there are signs that the unsettled few days may not last for too long across southern areas. So what will that mean for our temperatures across the UK? Well, let's have a look at this meteogram. So this shows the temperature, the daytime maximum and the minimum temperature for London in this chart. So you can see we'll follow the red blocks, which are the higher blocks, over the next few days. So after a colder start today, we will then move to that milder weather throughout the weekend into the start of next week. But then as that high pressure potentially builds in, there are signs that the daytime temperature as well as the nighttime temperature, the blues, do come down for southern areas of the UK. There is a bit of spread. You can see the boxes get wider as time goes on. That's fairly normal at this time range, but that does show that there is the potential for things to stay a little bit milder for a little bit longer, and exactly when that transition happens is not set in stone. However, remember I said in northern areas that it could stay a little bit wetter, and wetter means cloudier, and that generally means that temperatures don't dip down as much. So you can see for Edinburgh in this chart, the daytime temperatures return closer to average, which is this thicker red line for the weekend, but then into next week, they dip down a little bit, they come back up. There's less of that obvious trend of temperatures dropping down again, which would mean it's likely to stay a little bit cloudier and wetter. But before we get to that drier weather for southern areas by midweek next week, there's a lot more rain to come. And as a result, there are some rain warnings in force. So it's worth keeping up to date with the details. And you can do that by subscribing to our YouTube channel. Bye-bye.